You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, everybody. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network, and that's odyssey1.com to hear the audio. ODYSY1.com. And you can come over to the YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, Mr. Scotty Roberts, and you can watch the video simulcast as well as join with other listeners of the program tonight in the live chat room. And I'm going to admit something up front. My brain is on a low ebb tonight. I have been a bit under the weather for the last few days. You might be able to hear that in my voice. I doubt it's the flu. It's something, some kind of chest cold that has manifested in the partial loss of my voice, which is coming back a bit. But it has also left me dizzyingly out of touch with my brain. So we're going to do our best tonight. And just to show you, I'm here even when I am not tip-top. But we'll do our best. So if I make any mistakes tonight, you can let me know over in the live chat room or shoot me an email, and you can find all that information over on my website, which is scottallenroberts.com. Or if you're watching the video, it's right down there below the screen, just scrolling. All the different places you can get a hold of me and see my stuff. So, here we go. Let's jump into this. I want to talk, we've been talking about Jesus, the historical Jesus, the pagan Jesus, the Gnostic Jesus. But as you can tell if you saw the title for tonight's show, we're going to take just today and veer off a little bit because of the day it is. It is Columbus Day. And we celebrated Columbus Day since I was a kid. Columbus discovered America and so on. Until recent years, it seemed, where Columbus Day has been vilified, and Columbus himself as a historical figure vilified, for committing genocide against the Arawak Indians, for the things that he brought to America, that he didn't really discover America, because there were already people here, and there was civilization, a vast civilization here. And so, I want to talk about that. There is part of me that has supported that look into and that move to making it an indigenous peoples day, because I've always supported Native American issues, and I get it. I see some of the things that were attributed to Columbus. Yet at the same time, there's another side to that. And let's kind of look at this. Let's dig into Columbus just a little bit. Now, we all know Columbus for one thing. It said that Columbus, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he discovered America. And as we have heard, almost by accident, he thought he was going to India, and so hence the West Indies came into the name after he discovered them, and he landed on a little island down in the Caribbean, and claimed it, of course, for Spain. But let's look a little bit at Columbus and see if we can get some of our facts straight about him. Is celebrating Columbus Day celebrating a genocide of the Native American tribes that he encountered back in the late 1400s? And forgive my coughing. Once again, I have no cough button available to me on the program I use for this show, so my apologies. I'll get that something rigged up one of these days, and I keep saying that, and then I don't think of it until I cough again while I'm doing my show. So pardon me, and it's a little more virile today, my coughing, seeing as I'm a bit under the weather still. So ignore it as best you can. Chalk it up to, it's just Scotty. Scotty's coughing. So let's move on here. The truth about Columbus. The very basic truth about Columbus that he was neither a perfect man, nor was he this historic villain that recent critics have made him out to be. Christopher Columbus was actually a man ahead of his time. He had vision. And his discoveries changed the course of the world history of his day by connecting the peoples of the world for the first time. And I want to look tonight at separating some of the myths from the facts, and then you can kind of decide where you want to fall on this issue. I have said many times I support the Indigenous Peoples Day because they were here. But now, the more I dig in, the more I think about it, the more I can't just swing to one side as a knee-jerk reaction. I need to look into the facts and find out behind every accusation, folks, there is a whole litany of facts that are either for, against, pro or con, or somewhere down the middle. And we find that even in current politics today, impeachment stuff and all of that, everything that goes on in politics and government, there's always more than one side to what you might think is the story that is being either foisted or being hoisted the highest and the loudest in front of our faces. And so, looking at Columbus, you've got to look at the historical truths that too often get obscured or are ignored as the detractors attempt to reinterpret the past. And the reason you're hearing more and more about Indigenous Peoples Day as opposed to Columbus Day is because that side of the argument is the alternative history argument. And look how much we are into alternative history and alternative facts, especially nowadays. Even this series I'm doing on Jesus and the Gnostic God-man and the comparatives of Jesus to all the other messiahs that came up. This is alternate history to what we think we've known for hundreds and hundreds of years. So alternate history is very big on everybody's plate. And so are Native American issues, as rightfully they should be. I think sometimes the loudest shouters in this, all of this stuff, get the most attention. And that's why you hear all this stuff. Many opponents to Columbus Day and to Columbus have made him a scapegoat for all of the evils in the New World after 1492. This is not only historically inaccurate, it's just unjust. And it's the way, say, white people have been made the scapegoat for every problem that has occurred to people of color in the world. So it's that kind of thing. It's an overboard, it's a knee-jerk, it starts as a knee-jerk reaction, but it's an overboard reaction. Here's a couple of the truths before we dig into it about Columbus himself. He's been outrageously slandered and falsely accused of the crimes of other people. The record shows he actually sought to treat the natives with respect and restrain any kind of mistreatment against them. Now, the truth of the matter is that bad things happen. Even people like Columbus, people did bad things. He lived in an era where slavery was a good thing. He lived in an era where mistreatment of others was a practical daily affair. And so did he mistreat people? Yeah, he did some things, but he's also blamed for a lot of things he did not do. And another thing is opposition to Columbus is not a recent development. In the 1920s, of all people groups, the Ku Klux Klan mounted a bigoted campaign against Christopher Columbus because he was a Catholic Italian who sailed under the Spanish flag. So the Ku Klux Klan hated him. They were racist against Italians and Spanish. So there you go. The KKK was against, 100 years ago, was against Christopher Columbus. Modern attacks on Columbus are usually fueled by the work of radical activist professors in our schools of higher education, note my air quotations, who seek to warp history with a predetermined political agenda. They're taking 20th and 21st century politics and political correctness and attempting to apply those to somebody who lived in the 15th century. So contemporary attacks on Columbus are sometimes unknowingly influenced by anti-Spanish propaganda, known as the La Leyenda Negra. La Leyenda Negra, which originated in the 16th century during English and Dutch conflict with Spain. And they portray, remember the Spanish Armada in the 1600s? This was something that really started the anti-Spanish campaign as brutal and untrustworthy. So hopefully, through some of the information I'm going to give you tonight, you'll get a little more balanced picture and a little more accurate understanding of Christopher Columbus and what he accomplished and why we continue to celebrate his achievements on even today, Monday. Today it's the 14th of October. I know that date switches around for Columbus Day. But that's why the day honoring him exists. And hopefully you'll discover a little bit of truth here. And that's kind of an exciting thing for me to dig into things, because I will be very honest and say I was very swayed by the Native American activism, the indigenous peoples activism against Columbus. And there's still a bit of me that hangs on to that. Because, number one, it was alternative history, and I learned that history, but now I'm finding out that some of that history is extreme attacks on Columbus as opposed to the actual truth of the matter. And when somebody is an activist for something, even though I agree with a lot of Native American activism, activism by nature is radical. Activism by nature is going to take you to the nth degree of an argument and hold that position, as opposed to just giving you the facts and saying, look, here's some things we discovered, but there's also this. There's this side, there's the opposite side. It's the same thing I'm going to do on the Gnostic Jesus. We're covering all the alternatives now, but I'm going to come in later in that series and give you a little more information about the historic Jesus from the church point of view, and we're going to examine that as well, because I want you to have the facts and you to make your determinations based on that. So first, let's look at Columbus. What kind of person was he? What did he do to link the New World to Europe? And how Americans began a new age of exploration that laid the foundations for the America we know today. So Christopher Columbus has always been known as this American icon from an American point of view. Not necessarily an Italian icon or a Spanish icon, but he was an Italian explorer and a navigator. He's credited with discovering America in 1492. And that's when he sailed to the New World. He encountered its native civilizations, and he effectively opened the way for trade between Europe and the Americas. This cultural exchange was something that he began, and interaction between the nations of Europe and the peoples of the Americas. This is something that Christopher Columbus, with all the bad talk about him in recent decades, this is something he started. He started trade. He started cultural exchange. He started interaction between the nations of Europe and the peoples of America. This is what he's credited for. He was born in 1451 in Genoa. It's a republic that's now a part of Italy. Columbus first went to sea on trading voyages as a teenager. And as a young adult, he moved to Portugal, where he gained valuable seafaring experience. And he relocated to Spain in 1485 as he developed a remarkable idea that would forever change the world. He was one of the big proponents of a global world instead of a flat earth theory. Asia was a prized trade destination for its gold, its exotic spices. But overland routes to get there were long and dangerous. If you went from Europe to Asia, look at what you had to pass through. You had to pass through all of Europe. You had to pass through Asia, the Himalayas, all of this to get to the Far East. I'm sorry. And so educated people of Columbus's day knew that the earth was a sphere. So Columbus devised a plan to find a faster and safer route to Asia. There wasn't just one way. You could go around the other way because you're on a globe, you're on a ball. And sorry, all you flat earthers out there, the earth is not flat. And if you think the earth is flat, you're ignoring science. We don't have to get into that today. Maybe we can talk about that. It's a kicked horse notion that's been bantied about for ages now. But educated people knew the world was round, even 500 years ago, 600 years ago. So Columbus devised a plan to find a fast way to circumvent the globe the other way around and get to China. And a deeply religious man, Columbus was also long to introduce Christianity to the people of Asia. And of course, he was part of the Roman Catholic Church, which is part of the problem in things these days, I think. But it has been an icon for 2,000 years, almost 2,000, 1,700 years. So Columbus won the sponsorship of the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. There you go. I'm slurring today. It's not drugs, it's my head. So, pardon me. So in August of 1492, he and his crew set sail in 3 ships, as we all know, since the time we were grade school kids, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And after 36 days at sea, that's how long it took them to cross the Atlantic, he made landfall in present-day Bahama Islands, where he first made contact with the native population there. And he and his crew then sailed on to the Caribbean islands of Cuba and then to Hispaniola. And that's present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Whenever I hear Hispaniola, I remember the name of the ship in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. James Hawkins and Long John Silver, and they were aboard the Hispaniola. And this is where he made friends with the native Taino tribe, led by Chief, I can't pronounce this name very well. It's almost like guacamole, but it's not. By Chief Guancanagari. Guan, or it could be Juan, because I know my grandfather lived on a little island in the Honduras for many years called Guanaja, and it was started the same way, G-U-A, for Guanaja. So this is probably Wakanagari. There you go. That was the chief. And he established a settlement which he named Navidad. And that's Columbus did. And so Columbus returned to Spain to share the news of his discovery. The following year, and by the way, this was a discovery day, he discovered that there were people already living here. And the following year, he sailed again to the New World with a much larger fleet and crew, and they found the settlement. They founded the settlement on Hispaniola completely destroyed. The colonists were all massacred. And Huancanagari blamed rival tribes and allied with Columbus in battling the tribes that were responsible for this. So leaving his 2 brothers to build a new settlement and to govern Hispaniola, Columbus explored the Caribbean islands further before venturing home to Spain again. And on his 3rd voyage to the Americas, Columbus explored parts of the mainland of Central and South America before returning to Hispaniola. And there he found the settlers in rebellion, complaining about his brother's poor governorship. And Columbus made concessions to quell the rebellion, allowed its leaders to return to Spain, and enforced harsh punishments on those Spaniards who persisted in mistreating the native peoples. Columbus instituted a law against mistreating the locals. And reports of trouble in Hispaniola provoked the Spanish monarchs to send a representative, the ambitious Francisco de Bobadilla. And so Francisco de Bobadilla, to investigate the claims. Bobadilla arrested Columbus for punishing his own men and sent him back to Spain. And the monarchs eventually acquitted Columbus of all charges. Now, after Queen Isabella's death, King Ferdinand allowed Columbus to return in 1502. Now, this is 10 years after his initial landfall, and to the New World, where after exploring the eastern coast of Central America, he was shipwrecked on Jamaica. And after a long wait, the governor of Hispaniola sent a rescue party, but he wouldn't allow Columbus to come to the island. Instead, Columbus was shipped back to Spain, where he died just a few years later in 1506. Now, Columbus was a man of faith, Catholic faith. He was a man of courage, and he was driven by lofty goals that he had, although he never actually found the western route to Asia that he sought. He would have had to sail all the way down the South American coast and around the tip of South America and head across the Pacific. He didn't know that was there. And so, although he never actually found the western route, his achievements would eventually lead to the establishment of entirely new nations, including the United States. Now, let's look at a couple of myths about him. But we're drawing close to the end of this first segment, so we'll just get him started here. An important thing about examining any historical figure, of course, be it Jesus, be it Columbus, be it Stalin, be it Winston Churchill, you've got to dig in to know the people, who they were, find out what the facts were versus the fiction. Did George Washington chop down a cherry tree, for instance? No, that's been pretty much proven to be a myth. Yet we don't discredit George Washington for that myth, that legend growing up. So we've got to learn the facts about the myths that surrounds this, the various myths that have surrounded Christopher Columbus. He's the Italian explorer. He's the Italian explorer whose voyage of discovery to the New World in 1492 linked Europe and the Americans and began this whole new age of exploration. And we're going to dig into these. First myth, and we'll hit this when we come back, is, did Columbus actually really discover anything? And I know with the Native American activists, I once saw a t-shirt of theirs, Clyde Bellencourt, who we mentioned when we were talking about Wounded Knee and Native American activism. He had a shirt that had the 3 ships and 1 ship going off the edge of a flat world, saying Columbus did not discover America. Well, did he? Sit tight for 2 minutes, and we'll see what we come up with. All right, folks, welcome back from that break. This is Scotty Roberts, and you're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network, ODYSY1.com, and you're watching the I was going to say stereo. I don't know why. You're watching, it isn't stereo, but you're watching the simulcast of this broadcast in video over on my YouTube stream, which is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And you can join the live chat room there, and on we'll go. I just want to make mention, you can see hanging in the background here my penman hats. I'm not wearing my penman hat today, but he's up here on the hook. If you want to avail yourself of the finest in custom hatwear, headwear, guys, women as well, go over to John Penman Hats, over at, penmanhats.com. You can find John Penman and Penman Hat Company both on Facebook and see a lot of pictures of what he does. Go get yours. Get a new lid for that pate of yours today. Good stuff. All right, let's move on here. We're talking about Christopher Columbus. And one of the first myths, there's a lot of myths about Columbus that have risen up over the years. And of course, that myth exists because, first of all, the initial question is going to come to you. Well, if Columbus discovered America, what about all these indigenous peoples that already lived here? What about the vast civilizations in Central America that existed? What about the vast tribal systems that existed? So did he actually discover America? And I can see how that question would rise up without doing any study at all. You go, Columbus discovered what? A landmass that was full of civilization and people already? How is that a discovery? So you've got to start asking these. Even though the questions were asked and some of the answers that came were probably not factually based, but more emotively based, let's look at this so you can make a good decision on Columbus. Not that it's a going concern for everybody, but on Columbus Day today, I heard that question come up many times. I heard on the local news way this morning. They were talking about how it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And that's here in Minnesota, Wisconsin. And you can even look at, there were maps put up today of the tribes that held certain territories, even here in Wisconsin, from the Ojibwe to the Mdewakanton Sioux to the Ho-Chunk. I believe there was Chippewa here as well, and also the Potawatomis down in the southwest corner of Wisconsin. So this was Indian territory at one time. So it's a good day to have Indigenous Peoples Day, but should we knock Columbus off the map, off the game board, so to speak? Well, one of the first myths was Columbus didn't actually discover anything. You've heard this. I've said it in the past. I've said, what did he really discover? Nothing. Well, Columbus discovered America. When he set sail in 1492, no one on the other side of the Atlantic knew the other was there. Nobody knew America was here. His voyage initiated the first continuous engagement between the peoples of the European and the American continents. He brought together this diverse cultural interaction, previously unknown to each other, and he sparked a mutual beneficial exchange of goods and ideas. And viewed from each other's side, his was most certainly a voyage of discovery. Did he discover in the plain black and white, Columbus discovered America? No, he didn't discover the landmass because it already existed with peoples and civilization. But what he did discover was something that the Europeans and the other part of the world knew nothing about up until this point. So, yes, Columbus discovered America, but in a different way than you might think. He discovered it and introduced things to Europe and to the indigenous peoples here that did not exist before. So it was an age of discovery, a voyage of discovery. One of the big ones, the big myths, I believe, about Columbus, and, as early, 20 years ago, thereabouts, a movie came out. 1492 was the title, and it played French actor, big French actor, Gerard Depardieu, played Columbus. And I think it showed this in that movie, if memory serves, was that he did not commit genocide, but he certainly found himself unable to control those around him and the people around him that were put into power by Spain and what they did. So the big myth is Columbus committed genocide. And I'm going to tell you outright, he did not commit genocide. Not against the Taino, not against the Arawaks. He did not do this. He sought to form good relationships with the native peoples of the New World, and he had no intention of doing them any harm. He had intended to sail to Asia. Do you think he was going to try to subjugate the Asians? No, that was not on his list. Asia was a land both populous and technologically advanced. His intent was to trade and evangelize, not conquest. That was not on his plate. In exploring and settling the New World, Columbus frequently ordered his men to treat the natives well and not commit any injustices or atrocities against them. He knew what the result of that would be. Do you want to come as a representative of Europe, so to speak, and the rest of the world, and start conquering the people that you meet? That was not his intent at all. And Columbus punished and even executed some of the settlers who went against his orders and abused the natives. Do you know that if they couldn't find gold, some of the people that were set up by Spain would cut off their hands if they didn't come back with gold for their day? Things like that, and there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it. But there was abuses going on, and Columbus punished these people. Scholars like Stanford professor emeritus Carol Delaney describe Columbus's interactions with the native peoples as generally benign, and his motivations as religious. He was not violent. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't cruel to those he encountered. And furthermore, the vast majority of the natives who died in the years after Columbus's arrival succumbed to communicable diseases inadvertently transmitted by the Europeans, rather than from any intentional act on the part of Columbus, his men, or settlers. Now, people would ask, they would say, well, the white man brought disease. The Plains Indians talked about how the white man brought smallpox to the Native Americans. It didn't exist here before that, before Europeans came. Cholera, other things like that. Now, did Columbus introduce the American civilization to some of these diseases that were rampant in Europe? Yeah, he did. Pardon me. But it also was not an intentional thing. It was people-to-people contact. So Columbus did not commit genocide. Genocide is, and I hear that word thrown around today, when people talk about their hatred for President Trump. They talk about how Trump is a xenophobe and somebody who will commit genocide. He's a hater of other peoples and wants to kill them all. It's nonsense. Genocide is a cognitive act on the part of leaders or nations that want to wipe out another people and take what they have. That's not always at the core of it. Hitler was trying to commit genocide against the Jewish peoples of Europe. It was to eradicate what he said was the problem in Europe. And it wasn't necessarily to take what they had, although they did that too. So genocide is the attempt or the action of wiping out a people. Columbus wasn't about this. It wasn't what he was doing. Another myth. Columbus is to be blamed for bringing diseases to the New World that killed many natives. Now, the fact behind this is that, yes, inadvertently he did. Europeans did bring communicable diseases to the New World, for which many native peoples had little or no immunity. And great numbers died as a result of this. And the vast number of indigenous peoples who died in the years following the European settlement of the New World perished from disease rather than from conflict or abuse at the hand of European settlers, although that happened too. This is a tragic, unintended consequence of the encounter between two cultures, but certainly not something for which Columbus or anyone else can be personally held responsible or culpable. Did Columbus encounter people knowingly bringing disease to them? No. They didn't even know how to handle certain diseases that we know how to do today. So what happened with Columbus and the settlers that followed him was the introduction of European diseases to an American culture. So another myth. Columbus introduced slavery to the New World. Now, here's a fact. Slavery was common, even amongst the native people in the Caribbean that Columbus encountered. Slavery was already common. And according to former Stanford anthropologist Carol Delaney, she said slavery was not Columbus's goal. Friendship with the native peoples was. Even today, enemy combatants are often captured and imprisoned, and criminals are often assigned to do manual labor. Now, that may seem like a rough justification for actions that took place. But just as you had our own founders of this country who said all men are created equal, all people are created equal, they did leave off women. They left off slaves. They left off people in their thinking. A lot of them felt that you needed to be a landowner to be able to experience those freedoms. That was it's no excuse. That's just the way the world was. And you had forward thinkers, futurists, like Thomas Jefferson, like many of our founders, who saw the inconsistency in what they declared in the Constitution and what they did as being slave owners. And many of them freed their slaves, Jefferson included. He even impregnated one of his slaves. He even gave his what he had when he died, went to some of his children by Hemings. What was her first name? Sarah Hemings. So not getting into that topic. That's a side topic and a rabbit trail that I don't have all the facts in front of me to talk about it cogently. But yes, it was the way things were done. It was a worldview that existed. And if you are a religious person, I mean, even Jesus talked about slaves obey your masters. They acknowledged that the system existed. Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, talked about slaves obeying their masters. And if you're a runaway, go back. The whole book of Philemon, written by Paul in the New Testament, the little letter. It's a very short book. That is a book where Paul sent the letter back with a runaway slave who had become a Christian to his master, who Paul knew. And with a letter of accept your slave back. He's now one in Christ with you. Whether you believe in the teaching or not, this was the fact of what was behind the letter. And so Jesus, even the pagans recognized slavery. Slavery was a worldwide thing. Now that's 1,000+ years later, almost 1,500 years earlier. But in Columbus Day, we still had slavery as an operative. And it was part of our culture. You had to be very forward thinking to not believe that slavery was something that should be done. And you had to be somebody who was exposed to the enslaved and to see the injustice, to understand the injustice, and to work against it. So slavery was commonplace. Did he introduce slavery to the New World, Columbus? No, it already existed here. So another myth. Columbus sought to force the natives to work. Now here's the fact behind that. Columbus resisted efforts to force the natives to work, especially to work for them. He expected his own men to build the settlements, search for natural resources, and perform their own labor. When he consented to using native laborers, he sought to compensate them properly as vassals of the Spanish crown. So now, yes, Columbus was claiming that America, what he discovered, was a vassal state to Spain. Now, he claimed it for Spain. And that was in great ignorance of the civilization that existed here already. So yes, even by doing that, by walking in and claiming we own you, we own your land, you're a vassal state to us, that's what the Roman Empire did. That's what anybody who annexed another country did. That's what we did as the United States as we expanded west into Indian territory. We annexed these people. And so when Columbus's men violated the standards, facing rebellion and under duress, Columbus allowed a system of labor already instituted by the rebels. Columbus himself is well documented to have advocated for just treatment of the natives. In his own letters, his own writing, he's well documented as being against enslaving them, against forcing them into any kind of labor for the Spanish crown. So, was he perfect in this? No. Did he stand against it? Yeah. So, there's a bit of both sides. Myth. Columbus was a brutal man. Columbus was not a brutal man. He often sought to restrain his own men from mistreating the native peoples. In a time when some would question whether the native peoples of America were truly even human beings, Columbus immediately acknowledged their humanity and innate dignity that they possessed. He recognized them as humans with immortal souls. He was concerned for their salvation and their right to choose freely to embrace the Christian faith. He was an evangelist for his Christian faith. He even adopted the son of the native chief as his own son. He saw them as human, and he treated them with dignity. Myth. Columbus forced his religion on the natives. Now here's a fact. Columbus was a devout Christian, and he desired to introduce the native peoples to Christianity, but he did not force anyone to convert. It wasn't a convert or die situation. He specifically saw the Indians as a people who would, and this is a quote, a people who would be better freed from error, is how he meant it, and converted to our holy faith by love than force. End quote from Christopher Columbus. He wrote that in his diary. Let me repeat that. He saw the Indians as a people who would be better freed from their spiritual error, in parentheses, and converted to our holy faith by love than by force. And he wrote that. He asked the monarchs and the Pope to send priests who would learn the native language and instruct the people in the Christian faith prior to baptism. Now, I'll tell you, when I was in seminary, there was a point where I was looking to be a missionary, to go out into the darkest bush and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, did I intend to do that by force? No. I wanted to share what I believed was the love of God, the love of Jesus with people. Now, we're talking back when I was a kid, 18, 19, 20 years old. And we're talking 40 years ago. And so, yeah, there are people that go to evangelize that don't have an ulterior motive of subjugating people or thinking that they might think, well, you're wrong for not believing. That is the error of your ways. But at the same time, they believe in converting by love. Watch who I am. I had a course that I taught to my youth group that was called Lifestyle Evangelism. It was one that said, don't be attracted to the words I preach, be attracted to the life I live. And I told the kids in my youth group almost 40 years ago, 35 years ago, that I said, if you want to win people to believe what you believe, if you believe this is important, and you believe God is calling them to come to Him, they're going to be attracted to you before they're attracted to your message. So live what you believe. Pardon me again for my lack of cough button. For those of you who did not hear my mini rant on not having my cough button set up for this broadcast. So Columbus was, here's another myth. Columbus was arrested and returned to Spain in chains for his cruelty against the native peoples of America. Now, here's the fact. After his third voyage, while he was governor of Hispaniola, Columbus was indeed arrested and taken back to Spain in chains. But it was for actions taken against rebellious European settlers that he was taken back in chains for. He had punished and even executed some of the Europeans for abusing the native people. Bartholomew de las Casas, although sometimes critical of aspects of Columbus's administration, wrote of the, quote, sweetness and benignity, end quote, of the explorer, and added, quote, truly I would not dare blame the admiral's intentions, for I know him well and I know his intentions were good, end quote. So Columbus was taken back in chains, not for abusing the native peoples, but because, according to some, he abused the Europeans for abusing the native peoples. That he locked them up and he executed some of them. And he was called a good man, a sweet man. Here's another myth. There's a couple of these left. Here's a myth. Columbus was only after gold, glory, and his own self-interest. Do you remember Disney's Pocahontas? And I know it well because my older kids grew up watching that when it first came out in the 90s, I believe, the late 90s. And now my younger kids have rediscovered it. And you hear that song in 1500, was it 14 or 15? 1507, or was it 16? John Smith Pocahontas, 1600. In 1607, we sailed the ocean blue. And the chorus went, for glory, gold, and God, and the Virginia Company. So this is what Columbus was also accused of. He was only after gold and glory and his own self-interest. Now, the fact of this is that Columbus surely desired to be rewarded for what he was doing. And he wanted to be recognized for his efforts. Who wouldn't? He's just done this amazing act of discovery in human history. And unless he was completely altruistic, this is a man who intended to retire on the fact that he made discoveries and he did something great. He wanted to be recognized for this. But these were not his primary driving motives for his voyages to the New World. His motivations, for the most part, were religious, including the desire to bring Christianity to foreign lands. You cannot take the ego out of anything with anybody. I don't care if you're the Pope or if you're some great righteous activist or if you're a soldier or whatever you might be. The things that we do, that we engage in. Do I do this radio show not wishing to take any glory for it? No. I want to be known for what I do. I want to be known for my books. I want to be known for my artwork. I want to gain enough reward off of all of these things combined that there will be a day I'm sipping mint juleps on a white sand beach near Hispaniola or anywhere. Caribbean and warm and with scuba diving waters. Yeah, I want to do that. We all have self-interest. But Columbus had these things just like any other normal human being. But at the same time, he mounted these missions. Yes, he had to find gold for the monarchs. Yes, there's gold. There was a fight over that. That he had to bring certain... They were funding him because they wanted him to bring back gold. And he went over there to find a route to Asia, discovered America instead, and his goals turned into missionary, to Christianizing these people, because that's what he believed. and also to establishing settlements, finding gold, whatever it might be. So the myth is that that's all he was all about, was the gold and self-interest. That's not true. Myth: Columbus was a poor navigator. Now, here's a fact. Columbus was a skilled navigator. And he made an unprecedented voyage across the Atlantic. He found the New World. And although Columbus did not reach Asia, as he'd hoped, his voyages revealed to an entire continent, previously unknown. It was stuck in the middle. He didn't know it was there. He wasn't a bad navigator. He just had two continents in the way, America, South America, North America, and then Central America that connected them. So Columbus is a symbol of white supremacy is the last myth, and then we're going to have to be done for tonight. In fact, the Ku Klux Klan, in particular, has demonstrated enormous hostility toward Columbus because he was Italian and Catholic, rather than Anglo-Saxon and Protestant, which aroused their anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic bigotry. And so historically, the KKK actively protested Columbus celebrations and monuments to the explorer. So folks, take a different look at Columbus. We're out of time for tonight, and we got to wrap this up. But look at him differently. Should there be a Columbus Day? Yeah, there should be. Should there be an Indigenous Peoples Day? Yeah, there should be. And they can both coexist, which is really what Columbus was all about. Folks, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. We'll be back after this 23-hour break. Sit tight.